Hi, friends. I'm Trent Kusters, co founder and director at League of Geeks, and this is the Game Maker's Notebook. A few days ago, I had a chance to sit down with audio designer Martin Kvale and Gregorios Kythreotis, creative director at Shedworks, to talk about their game, Sable. We had some brilliant chats where I spoke with Martin about how he managed to ground Sable in amongst all of its elements, utilizing audio design, as well as his work collaborating with Japanese Breakfast on the soundtrack. Greg and I spoke about how he went from childhood friend with his partner Dan to building a studio and releasing their game together. We spoke about balancing myth and comedy through their experience writing and designing the world of Sable, and how Sable really is a wondrous exercise in restraint in so many different ways. It really is a spectacular game, and these two are incredibly insightful and talented. I thoroughly enjoyed talking to them, and I think you'll enjoy listening to the conversation too. So without further ado, here it is. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Game Maker's Notebook. Today we have with us Martin Kvale, sound designer on Sable, and creative director at Shedworks, creators of Sable, Gregorios Kythreotis. Welcome, gentlemen.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Fantastic. Good stuff. Well, hey, look, just like we do every time in Game Maker's Notebook, I'm going to fly straight into it. I'm going to start with you, Greg. Because there's another 50% of Shedworks as well, right? Which is Daniel, your partner. How did you two get into games? Like, what's the journey from you small child Greg playing some video games or whatever, and Daniel as well, and then finding each other, Shedworks and Sable commencing? That's the seed of the idea.
I mean, in some ways it's a long story because we've known each other so long. We've known each other, since Daniel was born, I guess. Our dads went to university together.
Awesome.
And yeah, so we played games together and knew each other, but actually we didn't see each other or know each other very well for quite a long time, from about the age of 11 to, I guess, 22. But I studied architecture and Daniel studied comparative literature. And I was showing Daniel's dad, who's an architect, my architecture portfolio of my work. And he kind of said to me, what do you want to do when you graduate? I said, I want to make video games. I don't want to do architecture. And he kind of said to me, oh, you should speak to Daniel, because Daniel's kind of learning how to program. Maybe there's something there. So we went to the pub and caught up for the first time in like 10 years and had a chat and said, well, look, we're not going to get jobs in the games industry based on our university, our degree and the work that we got from that. So why don't we just try it, start our own studio, more as an internship kind of thing, more just like, just to get experience, more than like really hoping it would be an extremely viable business. I think a naive part of me thought that it would be, but and although it worked out in the end, I think that wasn't necessarily because of the way we started, I guess. But yeah, no, and we started working in my parents' shed, hence the name Shedworks. And yeah, really from there, that's where we came from, and we kind of self-taught. We taught ourselves everything we know about game development. To the point where we were so green, we were so fresh. We didn't even know. I remember the first, must have been 6 months at least, maybe a year, we were passing around USB sticks as our source control. Like that was our way of, we were like manually merging like Unity packages and stuff. It was a mess. So like that's
the one true way,
right? Like so yeah, and but we got there, and now we use proper source control, and yeah, it's good. But yeah.
Heck yeah. I love it. It's beautiful in its simplicity, just like Sable. It's such a fitting tale for the creators of the game. So Martin, I guess the question for you is like, when did when did you get pulled into this crazy ride? I think let's shoot ahead to that, and we can track back a little bit from there. Because, did you get it? Did you get the call like Arnie and Commando, or we need you for this job, or how did it all go down?
I think it's kind of like Arnie and Commando is pretty close to that, to be honest. I think we got introduced by a common friend, and he recommended me, I think, for Sable, and I think we basically had a call and talked a little bit about. Mostly I think you and Daniel talked a bunch about things, and maybe I said a few things as well, but I just remember that we talked generally about like the feel and vibe of Sable, and then maybe I did a sound test. I'm not sure, but I think we basically hit it off really well based on that conversation. Okay, yeah. So it's just on, and I think you also had like checked out some previous projects I've done, and especially like this one game called Fugle, or a bird if you translate it to English, which is like a voxelized bird game where you fly around as a bird without any other goal really. I think you were pretty confident that I would be a good collaborator on the project, and that's also like really nice to me because I love coming on as a collaborator rather than a contractor, because it's a big difference with that. So, and I think that was in 2017, maybe late, like December. Was it? Yeah. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it would have been late 2017, and
yeah.
Yeah, I remember I think the biggest thing I personally was really excited about for the game ahead of time was the bikes, and like what you were going to be able to do with that. And we talked about them being kind of like an instrument in the game, and how we wanted to handle that. And I think actually your work on Goner, well, the work on Fugle was like, okay, that's the like world and nature, and like you'll be able to do that. Like I wasn't too worried, but the Goner like sounds made me feel like, oh, that's some cool stuff that could translate somehow into the bikes, like so creative and like freeform. And at least for me, that was my thinking, was like, oh, there's these two kind of like different spaces that you've touched on, and I felt like Sable was probably going to have a bit of that. And I think, and then obviously just hitting it off, and I think it was pretty quick. Like we just had a chat and went, didn't we? It wasn't. I mean, there was no test. There was nothing. I just listened to you make sounds from your mouth, and I was like, "Oh, beautiful! Let's do it."
Well, you're used to that after Hidden Folks, I imagine, right, Martin?
Yeah.
Because all those sounds am I right in saying they were from your mouth as well?
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily all my mouth, but it's basically it was like we did the sessions with everyone that worked on the game, where we would do Skype calls or in person, where in front of a microphone is like, how would a pelican throwing up a bike sound like? And they're like, whoa, no, okay, well, more with this time, more feeling, like a lot of. So it was like all of the developers of Hidden Fox made their mouth sounds, and it was a very good experience actually. Like that and Gunner both have this thing in similar that they're all about the limitations of using one tool. So like the voice for Hidden Folks and the human voice, of course. And the OP1 is still a small weird synthesizer for Gunner. And it kind of keeps it, everything kind of works maybe a little bit because it all fits into the same style, I guess.
Yeah. I guess unbeknownst to you, it was like training you for this job, this exercise in constraint, which, I really, really love about Sable, and I'm definitely keen to get into. But Greg, why don't you, for our listeners here, and I know you're almost like a year or so post-launch, so you probably didn't think you'd have to do this again, but why don't you give us just like your high-level pitch for what the game is so people understand what we're talking about if they haven't played Sable before?
Yeah, so Sable's a open world exploration game set in a kind of sci-fi desert planet, and in the game you play as a young girl called Sable, leaving her nomadic clan, her home, for the first time, and going out to explore the world. And you ride on a hover bike across this desert planet, across these dunes, and really the game's about discovery and exploration. So the game is extremely freeform. There's no kind of main quests. There's just a beginning and end. And then the kind of middle is just like this this dotted around islands of like short stories. That's how we kind of thought about them. It was like it was an island of content within an ocean of desert. And yeah, they're connected by the world, but they're like none of the narratives tend to be directly connected, which I mean I could talk about maybe a bit later, but really helped us in production. And was something really deliberate about, just because we're such a small team. But yeah, that's the game really. It's about Sable finding herself, and people in this world, everyone wears a mask. And at the end of the game, Sable has to choose her mask. So the game is her trying on all these different masks and trying to discover like who she is and what that means. And there's like an introspective aspect to the writing, as well as the narrative of just like exploring and trying on these different masks. Yeah. And it's, we thought a lot about like gap years, or like cultural things where people leave home and go and discover themselves and become adults, basically. And that's kind of what this is.
That really is that sort of, that big middle, right, is the rite of passage, is Sable going off on her gliding, as you call it, from her culture, and finding her masks and choosing one at the end. That is that middle rite. It is that rite of passage there. It's really quite beautiful.
Yeah.
So the thing that I now want to sort of hone in on for our audience, our listeners here, is really the development, because I do want to talk about those things. Like I said, it's an exercise in constraint. There's some amazing inspirations there, and I think you've really found a concentrated way to like pay homage to so many beautiful things and capture the essence of some really, really great and amazing inspirations that are much bigger than your game and the teams and everything. So it's really quite a commendable effort. But what I wanted to drill in on is where the seed of this game, and sort of how did that start? So you got Daniel and yourself, you're together, you're like, hey, we're a lit major and an architecture grad, like we want to make a video game. How does Sable come along and run us through the beginning of that journey?
Yeah, so we were kind of freelancing, making games for other people. We were making some smaller mobile projects for ourselves, like small puzzle platformy type things. But they weren't really our strength or what we were really interested in making. And Sable, I think I remember watching, was it Force Awakens? And the first like 15 minutes or whatever, where Rey is on Jakku, and just thinking like, oh, what if she wasn't the hero? Like, what if she didn't leave home? What if that was a game, just like exploring a place and learning about a world and not leaving? And so that was the kind of like seed of the idea. And it went, so we started that early 2016, in fact, just exploring a few different things. And we did it through a 2-hour prototype together, just like a couple of Unity assets, a 2K by 2K sandbox, and then just a giant cube in the background that you could drive this like hover vehicle out to. And we took that to the pub. And for some reason, people seemed interested. We'd taken games to the pub before, nobody cared. So like, okay, maybe there's something here.
Love it.
But to be honest with you, we just thought this was what we cared about, and nobody else would really find it interesting. So we sat on it we pitched it a couple places. We got turned down, so we sat on it for a year. And then a year later, we kind of decided we were just like, let's just make the thing we want to make. Let's just do it. And we kind of designed this project around our strengths. I think that was a big difference between what we had done previously and what we did with Sable. Was we had never done a building with like any writing or any narrative or any architecture up to Sable, which, given our like backgrounds and our interests, was in retrospect kind of just mad. But
that's it, right? They're your strengths.
Yeah, it was. And so we did the obvious thing and we just went for it. We didn't really think we would make the project we made. We thought it would be, we had about 6 months of runway, and we were just like, let's just do it 6 months. Let's have fun with it. Let's just get it out. And then I don't know, maybe I would have just gone back to architecture and done my master's or something, honestly. And Daniel probably would have got a programming job in a game studio. But yeah, the first week or two, we started showing GIFs, which we're quite bad at sharing things, actually. So we never thought to like share this stuff. I think Daniel did it as a like tech thing, and then it was like, okay, these numbers are kind of interesting. And then another one where it was a bit more to it. I was like, okay. And then we started getting articles written about our GIFs, and I was like, okay, this is
You're like, no, stop.
Yeah, it was. I mean, and this was 2 weeks in, so I think this was actually a big problem. Yeah, this was a big problem for us.
You can file this under game dev horror stories, right? Like,
yeah, well, we did. I mean, we were so grateful. We were so grateful that we had anyone caring about what we were making, and that, I remember the article we had written. I think it was a Boing Boing article. It was just like a quick post, but it was really nice and it was really well written, and it was clear like what the buzz about the game was. So when we were like recruiting people later on, I just copy that article and be like, we're making a game, here, you can see it, and then like use that article to recruit people later on. But yeah, that was the start, really. It was just this small thing, and we really, really didn't think anyone would care or be like, we thought we all care, and a few people who like the things we like will care. But yeah, I think the biggest thing was actually, the idea and stuff like that was compelling, but actually I think the like technical execution of the art style was such a so captivating in a GIF, actually, because it looked so two-dimensional and then would kind of reveal itself to be three-dimensional. And I think that like that little magic trick in like 3 seconds always seemed to be effective. Well, it seemed to be really effective at the beginning on social media. And then like gradually we developed it and were able to kind of sell it on the idea of the game. But yeah, that was the initial.
So how did that? It's an amazing story, and it's funny because I interviewed the Unpacking devs, and it was kind of a similar thing, where it was the GIF that was like, oh, okay, this is bigger than we had thought, sort of thing. So how does it go from that idea where it is, and it's such a beautiful story in regards to the GIF blowing up, because you can see it and people sort of know what to expect from Sable. And that's one thing you can say about the game is like it delivers on the thing in that first GIF or the second GIF that went online, right? Like you delivered on that promise. So how do you then, what's the next steps? Like you're 2 weeks in, these GIFs start blowing up, you don't have much there. How did you then go about going, okay, well, what's the rest of this game? And then when did it become like a proper project? Raw Fury came on board at some point, in the credits, I can see 10 names in there, like Oscar and Meg and other folks as well.
Yeah. We definitely scaled up from the 2-person team, and we had a fantastic team on this project. Like you say, I think we were about 10, I can't remember the exact number, 14 maybe total touched the project. But I would say full time, we were mostly between, I don't know, like 4 and 6, say. But the
fun size.
So the first thing we did was find a publisher, really, and Raw Fury actually were quite on the front foot about that and approached us very directly, Callum particularly. And I remember we had a meeting with him, and it was meant to be an hour, and it was just like in a corridor at EGX in Birmingham. And we had the laptop in front of us, and it was like a really quick vertical slice we'd done. And that 1 hour meeting turned into a 2 hour meeting. And I just remember Callum just staring at the like day-night cycle we had like hacked together and just like looking at the colors changing, and was clearly like captivated by that for some reason. And then he said to us, you have to come to Stockholm. So we're like, okay, like let's go. We both have like family in that part of the world as well. So we're just like, okay, let's just go. We know it well enough. And yeah, Raw Fury were really, really keen on the project. They made us feel like they got the project, but also that they were going to give us freedom to kind of learn on the project, because we knew that we were coming in raw. We knew that they were coming in really early. We didn't have a pitch deck or anything. They basically said to us like, how much do you think this is going to cost? And we worked it out with them. We didn't, because we hadn't done that before. So for us, that was actually really supportive and helpful because, and we had a really honest conversation about that. We put a date in the contract and a number in the contract, but, from the get-go, they had said to us, like, look, those are just numbers in the contract. If you need more time, if you need, more money, we'll talk about it, and it will be a very like open, understanding conversation. And it was, and they really delivered on that several times throughout the project. And actually,
that's amazing.
We expanded quite a lot in the project because we ended up with a Game Pass deal and Microsoft deals that just meant that our budget could grow. Because even then, it was still a very ambitious project for the size of team and the scope that we had. But so then we went about recruiting really, and we approached a variety of collaborators really early on. We had Mike, our animator, on board. We had Meg Jayanth, we had Michelle, Japanese Breakfast, Michelle Zauner, and Martin as well. And I'm trying to think if anyone else had joined at that point. Maybe Shanaz, maybe that came later. But yeah, we just started recruiting based on like people's work we admired really, and it kind of snowballed from there. And later on, we had Kim and David from Sweet Baby join us for the writing, and that was amazing experience. And who else? Yeah, like people. And then Yanis and Jordan. We had 2 people come in the office. Yeah. Anyway, I'm just saying names at this point, but it doesn't necessarily mean anything. I mean, our team really, they really contributed so much, and the game wouldn't be what it is without them. But I do think we also we had such a clear vision from the beginning, and that is what allowed us to kind of punch above our weight in a way. And we had a clear vision of what it should be, but I think we weren't too dogmatic about the exact details of how we got there. So the idea was always like protect this aspect of like freeform exploration that in the game. So every decision, every design decision, every aesthetic decision fed into that basically, and making sure that worked. Yeah.
And Martin, like I imagine, coming onto this at this point in the process, that would have been something fantastic for you as well. It's not often when you go in, especially so early in the process of, even some indie games where it doesn't have it has such a clear vision.
I think that was actually one of the things that was really, really great about it. I think maybe I was the first person to join the team for like the project, and it means that we had a lot of time to work on audio. And when Michelle joined as well, we had a lot of time to work on audio and music together, which is really 2 sides of the coin. But I also remember like seeing, I was pretty much sold in the game from just the 2 GIFs that was out on Twitter. I was looking at them for like a long time, like, this resonates with me on some kind of deep fundamental way. But I just want to also say, like, being the third person that kind of jumped on the team, I was also quite amazed that these two people, like both Greg and Dan, had like never really done this before, and the way they kind of slowly gathered a team around them and kind of made sure that everyone saw the vision, everyone worked well together. And I'd say like doing that for the first time, that's really hard. I've seen so many small teams kind of struggle a lot, and big teams struggle a lot with these things, and I think the whole process for me was like very, very impressive with how well Dan and Greg treated the team and kept the game going really, really well. I think that's a huge strength, and that can be kind of felt as a result.
I'm so glad that you said that, Martin, because after everything that Greg just said, he still didn't explain how 2 guys that had never really made video games before figured out how to make a game as big as Sable, even, in an exercise in constraint. So it's really, really interesting to hear from your perspective that it was that, like, it seemed like, Greg and Dan were just, sort of feeling, obviously there's some knowledge there and everything, but like there's some, even thinking about console submissions and different, programming for different platforms and things like that, like figuring it out as you go. And I think it's really important for our readers to hear this and know this stuff too, is that there are games like, Goose Game was the second game that the crew at House ever made, like these big, really successful games, whether it be commercially or critically, or even just in regards to, the achievement of the actual piece of work and art at the end, that they can be put together by people who haven't spent 20 years in AAA dev or, gone to college studying game design or have some hot shot producer on the project or something.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think it is important to mention that we had previous projects under our belt at this point as well, like smaller mobile projects. But just because they are so much smaller, the experience is definitely different. But you do learn a lot, just by you're not starting a project with source control on a USB stick. Basic things like that. I think it's really important to make clear that we did have a bit of experience, but even though it wasn't like anything at this scale or this ambition, this it was like our first game, but at the same time we did have a couple of pieces of work to show for it previously.
Absolutely, well. and it just even going through that pitch to ship process on any game of any scale, like that's how I cut my teeth when I started. It was a studio called Taurus Games, and it was small third-party sort of games, like your Scooby-Doos or your, whatever it might be, and you got a tiny budget and short turnaround, but it teaches you so much just in that process of like getting that complete game out there. It's the same as the Game a Week thing. I remember it was Chris Charla from Xbox speaking to me about, it actually doesn't matter the size of the game that you're working on. It's just going through that cycle time and time again. I just completely agree with it. And so were those projects in between, Greg, were they in between that first initial, take it to the pub, quick prototype, and then when you picked it up again, like a year later or more? Or
there was some just before that, and then, in between as well. So we did one kind of after we had shown the gifts of Sable, we released the game on mobile. I don't even think it's available anymore because we don't pay the Apple App Store yearly thing. But I think it was called Swing King and the Temple of Bling, and it was like you're this little monkey and you're exploring these temples, and it's like a 2D platform puzzler sort of thing. And no, I mean, I think the actually one of the biggest things it prepared me for was just like the emotional damage that video games do to you when you try and release them. Martin's got the game there on his phone. I think it's still on Android. I don't know.
There it is, folks.
Yeah, I can't remember. But yeah, I think just like releasing a video game is such a difficult process on just a like technical level, on just like what you have to do as a job. And then the emotional side of it is something that I think can be very difficult to prepare for, because all you see are like successful people. You don't even really see the failures that often, but when you do, you don't hear from people because people don't want to talk about that stuff. And so like those games, like Swing King did okay for us, but it wasn't like I don't know, you couldn't make a living from those games forever. We could just about survive off them, but it was really, and I think having that experience of like pressing the button and then nobody caring, and like you put a lot of time and effort and emotion into something. I think that prepared me personally for like releasing Sable, because I think just like the highs and lows emotionally of releasing a video game, even just showing a video game, like when we first showed the game in 2018, and it kind of blew up on social media. The trailer was like top for number one on Reddit or something. I can't even remember, but I actually just sunk into like quite a emotional state. Like I was quite depressed after that, and I had to realize, like, no, this is chemical.
You've cut out a little bit.
Okay.
Oh, it's coming back.
Yeah,
I'm back. Yeah,
you're back.
Sorry.
Yeah, it put me in quite a like a dark place in a way, and that was, I could feel that was almost like chemical, because it was just so went from such a high to then just like dumping that chemically almost. I don't know what was happening, but I just remember like feeling that and thinking how I had similar feelings when we had released our previous games, but like it hadn't gone well even. And you feel this high of like having finished something, pressing the button to release and just like nothing from it. And I think that's the sort of thing that it actually really, I remember really vividly it preparing me for personally, because I think I probably would have struggled a bit more with that stuff if I hadn't had that experience. I think that's the thing I always tell developers now is, releasing a game is emotional as well. It's not just hard. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard folks refer to it before as like some sort of postpartum thing as well. As, you spend so much time with this thing and then it's gone, it's absent from your life. There's like a notion, this sense of purpose, or that, games as multi-year projects, especially, ones that you put so much of yourself into, that it just leaves a big hole in your life there.
Yeah, definitely.
So something I am interested to really get into now is the game itself, and I really want to talk about just some of the, like, me personally being selfish about this. The thing that I really took away from the game was this, this exercise in constraint. And I've heard Greg, you and Dan talk about inspirations like, you mentioned Star Wars here, right? Huge multi-billion-dollar franchise. I've heard you mention Zelda as well, and Breath of the Wild, right? And you can see those when you play the game. You're like, oh, okay, there's some similarities there, but again, big teams. But you've managed to take some, like, a slice of what makes those games magical, what that game magical, and really, distill it down to the parts that you want, like, in the essence of it. And so, what was it when you really look at, when you say, okay, this game is about exploration, like, where did you find that line between what this game is and what this game isn't? You said you had a really refined vision. What were those razors where you were like, it doesn't have this, it doesn't have combat, it doesn't have these things, and you kept that verticality quite low?
Yeah, that was our limitations. It's an expression of us as a team, and Daniel and I particularly. So we decided, okay, this is going to be very architecturally focused because that's what we can do. We can deliver on that. But the thing that we decided we weren't going to do, for example, was combat, because we didn't have an animator on board at the time, and I didn't think I could do it, and I don't think Daniel could do it. So okay, combat requires a lot of animation work to do well, and a lot of balancing, and it's a lot of work. So what if we take that out? But another big thing that we did was that ended up impacting the world building was the masks, for example. The mask, that's a product of a limitation. I really didn't want to draw and animate faces throughout the game. But we wanted to populate the world with, more than just Sable. So the thought was, okay, what if everyone wore a mask? What does that mean for the world building? And then that became like the core conceit of the game, and you're trying on these different masks, but it originates from that kind of technical limitation, because we had quite a clear idea how some things were going to be achieved technically. So like the characters or the hover bike is modular, for example, and that was, again, so we could populate a world, and then it turned into a mechanic for the player to use and turned into a big motivation in terms of exploration. These were all kind of aspects that, like you say, like originate from that idea of constraint and limitation, and just really embracing that as much as possible. And I think that's where like really good design does occur, is when you have those limitations. Because when you don't have a limitation, it's kind of not design anymore. It's just putting stuff in.
I completely agree.
Yeah. And I think that naturally suited we set it in a desert because it suits that. And we always thought, the desert could be an ocean, it could be like dunes or whatever. But the point is that it's relatively lifeless, and the player shouldn't spend loads of time just meandering, like really like doing stuff in it. They should be traversing through it, and that was where that comes from. And so it was this kind of confluence of ideas that we decided would contribute to helping us make a game like this, really. And the art style, because it's so stylized, and because it uses this outline, it meant that we could actually keep the art style relatively low poly, but still have what looks like a relatively, I wouldn't call it a high amount of detail, but there's like a good density there without having to spend much time texturing stuff. And so I think that all that stuff, we were really geared towards making the most of what we had. I mean, that's not to say we made like loads. Every decision was clever. I mean, fundamentally making an open world game where you can climb on everything is probably a bad decision, and that's where that philosophy went out the window. But I think we were really ambitious in that regard, because we knew that the architecture stuff was a strength, and it was like, okay, what's the challenge of this? It's that you have to make your building, your spaces like believable from literally every angle. And then I think the technical challenges we just had to deal with later, which is like, okay, streaming and loading, that's a nightmare. And that was actually maybe, there's problems that we knew were there in the beginning, but we figured them out in the end. And
of course you do. You find yourself in that position, right? And you just you make your bed like 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, a year earlier, and then you find yourself having to lay in it later. There's so much of game dev is that coming around past Greg haunting you. Yeah,
definitely. I think this is almost a problem when we've got that experience of doing this. We know like what were the bad decisions, and I think I've definitely found it harder to forget about that and just like go for something in a way, like afterwards. Like you have to almost be a bit blind to your own like foolishness if you do know better now, because I think you also don't achieve much if you don't have that ambition, if you don't just try it and just think like, we will figure this out. Like, even if it's hard work, we'll figure it out. It might not be as hard as we think. You sometimes just have to go for it. So there's a balance there for sure. I really like
that naivety is definitely a big ingredient in some bold plans a lot of the time as well, and making sure that they come through. So Martin, how did this constraint then, influence you, and how did you exercise that and, marry up with, the game is incredibly paced as well. It's really purposeful. And then having Michelle on board as well, really early on. Talk us through a bit of your journey in regards to Sable and how you see, speaking of design and constraints and the sound design and how you approach that.
First of all, English being my second language, I thought I could explain it this eloquently that Greg just did. But I do think, I think for me, Sable was all about playing and feeling what was there and what we were going for, in the sense that, you walk around in this vast empty area, and the main things to kind of figure out for us with the audio was the feel of things. Like, for instance, the feel of an abandoned spaceship, the feel of the sacred sanctums and mystical places, or just like the desolate kind of the emptiness of the desert, or the different kinds of sand. And so I think it was basically just mapping out these kind of things of how the thing should feel and how it should play, and what do we wanted the players to feel. And beyond that, it was like a lot of iterating. I think the main thing with Sable for me was like I was playing it a lot, I was testing it a lot, and it kind of slowly emerged this sound palette based from just a lot of experimentation, a lot of trial and error, a lot of just like, like the footstep sounds I was still working on up until the last bit of the game, with just like how should it sound with different kind of surfaces, how grainy should like it things sound like, even though the art style is quite flat and low detailed. I think that Greg and Daniel talked about earlier, pretty early on in the process, was that the sound could contribute a lot of the feeling with texture, and that was like a focus for attention. And also, like, once Michelle was in, it was also like, I'd say it was a very easy game to work on, because her music added so much, together with the graphics, together with the writing, together with just the movement in this space. It was more like about making everything kind of work together and sewing it together delicately. And for me, like, the sound design felt like a nice, easy process of having the time to just try out a lot of ideas, and knowing very well about like how the intention of the game and where the end goal was that we wanted to achieve. So I think that, and that's also like a good result of coming into something very early, that we can actually try a lot of things, and I could be like a part of the game as it progresses, and the audio could develop alongside with design, with art, with the written words.
I feel like
I mean, I have to say, like, I think of all the big games I worked on, I also think Sable was probably one of the most delightful projects I've ever worked on, and I think I still just like hope that would like to work on it again. And I think a lot of people who work on Sable feel the same way as well. And I think it's to do with just it was a clear vision. It was a delightful game, and also like just playing the game felt like it's just really, really nice. Like, even at the last 2 months where we were working pretty hard to get it done, I would still, if I would need a break from working on the game, I would just go hit up Lore, which is a character in Sable, and have a conversation with her. And I would just, like, have a lot of emotion about it, and feel very good about, I'll take like half an hour off the game to play the game and enjoy it, and then go back to working on the game.
I relate to that for sure. In playing the game, I played a little bit before, knowing that I was going to interview you for the podcast, and then I was like, all right, well, I got to, it's a good reason to go back to Sable, make time for it. And stuff at our studio right now is really full on. Like, we're about to announce a couple of games, and there's a lot happening. And I found Sable, it wasn't like another thing on my task list to do for the podcast and the prep and everything like that. It actually became part of my escape from the day and part of my unwinding, and just, exploring those dunes and going over them. It's just such a meditative experience, even the climbing and things, every part of it. And Martin, one point that I wanted to speak to you about, particularly in the game, is that moment where you break out of that first starting area and the title, comes up on screen. We come out of the cold open, as they would call it, in TV, and Michelle's track kicks in. It's just such a fantastic moment. How did that come about? Where did that start, and how did you massage that into what it is today?
That needed no massaging. Like, I think, basically, Michelle made that track, and it was quite early in the process, so that the track was quite broad in the sense that she thought of the main themes in the game, and how Sable would generally feel about going off into something unknown. And also, I think, like, everyone on the team had at some point this very strong impact of emotion when they played this part, even though we work on it. But so that specific moment needed kind of no massaging. I think we pretty much put it in. And we kind of calculated a little bit, like, how long did it need to be to the next point, to the next camp, for it to kind of make sense that the music would start playing. And I think after that, we didn't touch it almost. I came back once because there was some bug with if you jump into the bubble, it attenuates the music a little bit there, and that was kind of jarring. But that was like 1 year after, and the music was just perfect for that sense.
It's beautiful.
I think we kind of wanted our own Red Dead Redemption 1 moment, and that's
it's exactly what I thought about. Great.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. Got something to say?
Yeah. No, I just was going to say, I think one thing I wanted to say when you were talking about the audio design earlier was how, because the game is so stylized, because the art is so stylized, because what we're rendering is so specific, the audio was so crucial to adding that texture. And I think it's like, can't be overstated what a big impact it had in terms of, particularly in the dunes, like when you're just driving along, giving that a sense of kind of life and inhabitation without actually having to like render skinned meshes somewhere in like completely separated from like a scene that was actually had something to do in it. And just having like crickets, it, and I'm sure the audience of this podcast will appreciate that, but I would really like to make a point of that, particularly for this game, just because it was so stylized. Even just like the ambience of an old temple or whatever, and hearing it echo off the walls, and it really gives that surface kind of materiality. The stonework, or like or the echo of the steel. It changes how it feels completely. Whereas prior to that, prior to those going in, it could feel very flat. Particularly in this style. It just makes such a huge difference, and I think it really adds so much. I just wanted to make that point, really, that from the like visual design perspective, it has a huge impact.
I think it's a good. I mean, like, I'm very glad you mentioned Gunner earlier, because Gunner is this platformer with a really cheeky sound, and I think that I always, since we talked about working on Sable as like how it was to work on, I think it's also worth mentioning that I always saw Sable as like anti-Star Wars. Like there's no great evil or good in the galaxy, and it's not afraid to take itself a little bit like less high and serious. So a lot of Sable also came from like looking for the fun, looking for the unconventional. Like, let's not necessarily make a hoverbike sound like a hoverbike as in Star Wars or Star Trek or all these 5,000 other sci-fi movies that are out there and are iconic, because I think there's a lot of sense of play and humor in Sable that I was really trying to kind of look for as well. And in that sense, like, I totally agree with Greg that we did lean in on that Gunner, like on looking for like weird and sounds that necessarily didn't sound epic is a good word. Like, we shied away from epic, even though the glider track coming in certainly did feel epic and emotional, as did the ending, I feel, as well. Like, there were plenty of moments where that came in later, and it kind of really helped. I think the rest of the game wasn't afraid to talk about beetle poop or farting little plants that you would put in front of a giant beetle. And the Beatles in general was a lot of humor, I think.
Yeah, definitely. That was something that I did want to ask you, Greg, is how much was humor a consideration from the outset? Because the game does have a really, really particular sort of like signature sense of like comedy to it, and these people, and it's almost, I can't figure out whether it's you and Dan or whether it's the actual people from these different cultures and the characters themselves, and the writers of it really is quite affecting.
I think that is a bit of me and Dan. Like, I don't know, when I plan a quest or whatever, I do like to play with or subvert expectations sometimes. I think that's part of it. Like, a lot of the game was like trying to set up mysteries or things to discover, but sometimes it's fun when those things aren't as serious as you thought. That's actually more memorable. But I think, and I do think there it is our sense of humor for sure. I think that comes through. But the other side is just that, like, from a world building aspect, I think it lends more believability to your world if the people in your world don't take everything like super serious, because that's how people in real life are. Like, one of the kind of ideas behind this game, and I think this is something really inspired by Studio Ghibli, was just the idea of like normality and having people doing ordinary, everyday things in a world that is quite fantastical and unbelievable and unreal in a way. And that helps ground Sable as a character, but also the world as a place. So like it has a functional purpose as well as just us, I don't know, maybe getting a bit bored and like thinking, yeah, let's just do something, like let's just go for it. Like, and I think it's more memorable. Like the Chums was like, I remember showing my girlfriend that, and she was just annoyed at me. She was like, this is just ridiculous. You can't do this. And there are times when you'd have those conversations.
This is illegal, Greg. You can't put these in the game.
Yeah, like I'm pretty sure this constitutes something. But no, you're just having fun with it, and it's a bit of a play with some of the like other sci-fi references that get a bit funny as well. But no, I think I'm trying to think specific moments that are like really comedic, but it's something we talked about with the writers, and I think they have a really good sense of humor too. So I'm not trying to take it away from them, but it was definitely something that we. To be honest with you, I wouldn't say from the beginning we were like, yeah, this game has to be quite funny or anything, but it was just a natural part of the process of putting ourselves in the game, I think, because we did have a good time with
it. And it does feel quite natural in its execution.
Yeah. I'm glad to hear that. I mean, it's always hard to know as well when you find something funny if it's just going to come across as a bit weird, but I think that was also okay.
Yeah, that's me at every dinner party. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I feel like that's okay too. I think, I wonder if there's like a British sort of cultural thing as well there, where it's like the humor is...
Oh, yes, interesting.
Yeah, like the humor is maybe slightly more British than a lot of players would be used to, maybe. I don't know, but that's just speculative. It's hard to say.
Well, culturally, we share a little bit of that, that style of humor, and it definitely, I could sense it for sure. It's drier and it is more sort of in the moment and that's why I asked, was it a purposeful thing, or was it just the result of the team and yourselves? Because it definitely did feel like that sort of, it just was naturally finding its way into the world. It really feels in place. And so speaking to that and, a sense of place, because it's something that Sable really has. Martin, you spoke to that for a bit. Greg, you've spoken about it as well. But there are just so many things that contribute to this. And one that you just spoke about mysteries and fantastical elements in something like, Studio Ghibli, but it feeling quite grounded because of the, people doing everyday things and stuff like that. But one thing that the game does have is this a real strong sense of myth. It does feel like it is a place that, the people, the different cultures, they have their own myths, whether it be quite religious or quite practical. We've got these futuristic or these ancient societies that had this futuristic technology that are no longer with us anymore. There's, it has all of these very mythical connotations and a presence to it. What were your inspirations there? And that does feel like something that was there from the outset, right? Is to create a world that really did feel mythical, but almost grounded within it.
Yeah, I think there are a few like literary inspirations. I think I'm trying to think exactly. I think like Ridley Walker was one that Daniel talked a lot about. I've not actually read it, but I tried to read it. It's hard to read, but it's this idea of like this character exploring, like I think it's Kent, rural Kent, and like after a kind of apocalypse has occurred, and just the language and culture is like warped and distended in interesting ways. And the idea is that you can see kind of the origins of these ideas in the modern culture by understanding our culture. And I think this idea of like just historical through lines and things coming from other things rather than just being arbitrary in origin culturally was like a really important thing for us. And we tried to establish these kind of three eras in the game that we talk about. The atomic, which is like the ships, the monumental, which is kind of like the old more static ruins, and then the nomadic era, which is like the modern era. And we tried to like overlay these different eras and the ideas, like each one has its own ideas about how people live or should live or might live. And those things interact and lead into one another. And we really try to tie those together and have them sit on top of each other, but also have it so that it wasn't necessarily clear cut. So characters in the game aren't necessarily aware of certain historical things or aware of how, why do we wear masks? Like they're not necessarily aware of why that is the case, but it has some origin in like when humans first arrived on this planet or whatever. And I think for me, at least like from my perspective, well, it was something that we talked about as a team a lot and we engaged with a lot as a team. And I think Daniel and I, when we just converse generally, we'll spend a lot of time talking about these ideas. But from my perspective, architectural process actually led me to that as well. So in architecture, you spend a lot of time really contemplating context, and you just have these limit things that you pull from. So whether the context is your client, your budget, the location, the culture, the brief, you have all these different aspects to pull from. And when you make a video game, you just kind of have to work what that is out. And I think, you can make those decisions off the cuff and just kind of like instinctively, intuitively run with it. But what we try to do is really think about where the through lines are rather than things necessarily being purely there for like aesthetic. They come from something. So like, and also just not telling the player everything. And really, I think that works in two ways. One, it means that you don't have to like really flesh out everything. Like I don't have to know the dates of this war or whatever in this world, but and try and explain that to the player, because I think
it's like when you do say that, that's one of the big things that the game has too, is that mystery, that sense of mystery. And as a player, there is so much stuff that we don't know. And as you said, like the people themselves maybe don't even know why they wear these masks, but it's like explaining things away is the easiest way to kill that mystery and that sense of myth or sense of importance. We all saw it with midichlorians however many years ago. But how did you where did you make those calls, or how did it feel a natural process of what to reveal and what not to reveal to the player? Because another thing that the game does, which is quite unique to Sable, is this constant inner monologue through the game, where you could just explicitly explain a lot to the player through the inner monologue.
Yeah, the inner monologue was really important because we wanted to ground Sable as a character, and have her be a real person, but also have her be someone that doesn't just arrive with amnesia and has lived in this world, but is also discovering it and discovering herself. And you're right, like there was information that we could kind of litter through that. But in terms of what we revealed and what we hid, there wasn't like a big scientific kind of process to that. It was just what felt right. And that's it really is. It's just kind of what feels like the right level of secrecy and mystery. And I think that's like something I really love. I really like engage with. I find it interesting. I like any mystery, like whether it's a kind of true crime mystery or a like exploration, just like what's around this corner. Like I find that stuff so engaging, and I think that that's true for like. I think video games can do that really well, and just video games for me are about learning a lot of the time. So whether it's learning about a world, learning about a mechanic and mastering it, like there's a lot of like as a game designer, you have to teach or tell the player information basically, and working out the threshold for that information is part of all game design, I think. Even, whether it's something more kind of like gamey, I guess, like something that is actually, a game, or something that is more like what we made, which I guess is a bit more just ambient than a like win, fail, state game. But I still think in both those design practices, it is about information that you reveal and don't reveal. And so I try and think about it in that way, and think about it as a resource for players as well. Like, you know, I think this is something that came to me a bit later on, but like also not having information, not having things that aren't there, having places that are empty give like a sense of depth and realism to the places that are more dense. And it's about communicating where the player should go. I guess that's really important, but also just having this layer in the world. It doesn't have to be explicit. It just has to be there. And I don't think players have to understand what is layered or in depth about it. They just have to feel like there's stuff they don't necessarily understand, and it gives things a depth. It gives things a layering that I think if you think about travel, right? Like one of the things that Martin and I did on this game was we went on a research trip around I think it was through Arizona.
Death Valley and
we were mostly researching the desert, but when you think about traveling and actually that's not the best example. I went to Marrakesh afterwards, and when you think about traveling in a place or a culture that is unfamiliar to your own, you don't need every individual like thing explained to you to understand that it's like intriguing or be curious about it. I think just that you don't know about it is like, you know, curious to you as well in itself.
That's the beauty of it, right? In a major way.
Yeah,
so Martin, Martin, yourself and Michelle, Japanese Breakfast, in these cultures, this sense of myth, the fantastical, whilst keeping it grounded. At times, and I mean this as a compliment. I mean, I seriously do, because it could sound like I'm going the other way. But like the soundtrack at times is so prominent that it creates. It's almost like it is dictating the sense of space, and it's grabbing you and saying like, this is the place, this is the way that you should feel right now. And it's a very welcome moment, like, you know, the moment that we spoke about before, but even in ambient moments through the game too. And then there are moments where it's fully in the background, and it's everything else, and it's just this tiny little complementary piece. So yourself and Michelle, how do you balance those three cultures and how present they need to be, and this again this sense of myth and the fantastical?
I think we had some loose rules and definitions about what we wanted to give a sense of the different places, and that both dictated a little bit of how we did. She did approach composition, and I just approached sound design, but also a lot of it came together in the implementation. So usually the abandoned ships and the puzzles that you go into, I have a more static sense of style, but they interact with the music and the sound design with each other and kind of mixes and merges on what is kind of more vague, because there's like this sense of something is happening, but something is not functioning correctly, but it's old and ancient, and especially like those areas, especially indoors, I think are quite in your face because they're more focused. And that also reflects their general state of like where they are from the time epoch or something like that era. Sorry, yes. But then you go out in the open, and it's like the place by very different rules, because we lean in way more to the sense of we don't quite know where the player will go, but we want to help them feel a sense of space and joy of exploration. And there it like has more of I'd say at times the music may feel like it's more or less present, but sometimes in the background or not. But I think the fact that it keeps on evolving and it kind of moves with you, and you know, at dusk and dawn is quite quiet. If in the middle of the day it's quite loud, but if you start climbing, then the percussion might maybe falling away a little bit as you kind of start rising. Or if you jump down inside the well, then the voices are kind of gone. We basically wanted to make sure that the music and ambience and atmosphere reacts a lot to what the player is doing. So it's kind of like a companion piece in a sense. Like it does dictate a little bit of how the vibe is, I think, but it also is dictated a lot, way more than I think a lot of people thinks about with what you actually are doing. So I think it's like a nice kind of dance that I'm very happy about the result in the end, like how it feels, how it's always like there and influencing you in ways. But I think, at least especially with music, and I can only talk about like kind of how we did the implementation part of it because I didn't compose it, of course. But I think there's a lot of kind of media literacy when it comes to understanding what music is and what it wants to do. Like if you hear sad music, you know, oh, this is a sad moment. If you hear like a hopeful music, oh, this makes me feel this makes me feel that. But we also try to kind of put in interacting with you to be kind of less static. So this can kind of keep feeling natural and keep feeling organic to the players. Intentional, like curiosity, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally does. It totally does. And it is. I can understand how you're happy with the result because it is truly affecting how those things do. Like, you know, they really come to, at some moments. You know, you're climbing something and you break it, and the colors are really quite saturated at that. It's the perfect time of day, and it's really, you know, and there are some birds that fly off the top of the trailer, which is another thing. The amount of life and wildlife in the game as well is quite impressive, and especially for just the two of you. You hear about that a little bit in a second, but sometimes it's those sort of things, and then other times it really is you're just hitting the dunes, and it's, you know, a Japanese breakfast track that's like really, really holding you there, and it feels like this really cooperative balance and dance between all the elements. So let's talk a little bit about the amount of wildlife in the game, Greg, because I actually was really surprised at how much there was, because I was aware that there was two of you with some pals, you know, helping out on this. And I don't know how many different types of birds and beetles and different things I spotted. So when did you sort of start doing that and lean into that to the degree that you did?
Yeah, I think, you know, we knew that part of this world was the story of this world was that the story of the people was that they were adapting to the world more than they were kind of forming the world around themselves. And part of that is wildlife, right? Like it's nature, it's creatures, it's other things living and sharing this space with you. So, you know, it became an important part of the narrative almost, that you felt connected to wildlife in this world. And also like there are functional, you know, like goats and camels and stuff like that in the world. But I think birds were like a really important one, and actually it's been brought up before. And some of it is like just it's just bullshit. Like it's just like, oh, that's just a particle effect, and it kind of just looks like a bird behavior or whatever. And you know, I've had people say to me like, oh, the variety of bird behaviors is incredible, and it's like, no, like it's just a particle system. Like it's bullshit. So like I think yeah, I'm kind of revealing the magic trick here, but that's one aspect, and then the other is just you know, we tried to be clever again about how, like with birds, how we implemented that, and you know, they react to the player and it feels expressive, but they all use the same base system, and the butterflies use a similar system, and then the way that we distribute them is based on like biomes, just to give each area like its own flavor and its own feeling, and that combined with like the color profiles and the music and the, you know, the feeling of move, it just gives you a sense of moving through this space. And then we just have some really basic behaviors on them. So like some butterflies, they only appear at certain times of day or only appear around certain kinds of plants. And then we have the beetles are like the biggest thing, and we try to tie them in with the culture of some of the characters and some of the world. And I would have liked to have actually done more of that, but it kind of got away from us a little bit. But yeah, the beetles, I think we had a lot of fun with, and they were just quite like strange. I mean, that actually I would also say I think there was there were like three primary references for the I'm trying to remember. So definitely there's Nausicaa, which I feel like the forests and the interplay between Nausicaa as a character and the like forwarding the industriousness of humanity and then the poisoning of the forest and the kind of interplay between those things were something we didn't want to explicitly do in Sable, but had ideas from. Then there was an animation, I think it's called Scavengers. It's
I think I know. I was playing the game, Greg, and I'm like, have they watched this weird animation where on this alien planet where they're going and they're finding all these different things and feeding this thing to this other beast and then waiting for it to come up from the bottom? Is that the one? Are we talking about the same one?
Yeah. I just checked it now. I can confirm it. It's called Scavengers.
Yeah. I think I've sent it to you before, Martin. It's I think what was quite interesting about that animation was just this idea of an ecosystem, right? And it was quite a video game idea of an ecosystem and the way things are connected and everything's a key that unlocks another thing. And I think that gave me a feeling of but it still feels like an ecosystem in some ways. And in some ways, nature is a bit is systemic like that on a broad scale. And so you can explore those ideas. So I think it comes from all of those different aspects, I guess. And that's where the beetles being a kind of reactive to the player in really specific ways and kind of a puzzle. I think that's where that idea kind of comes from a bit. And I'm trying to think. So I think those things, they tie into what we're trying to say with the narrative of the world, and then also what we're able to do mechanically. And I think I would have liked to have actually added a lot more layering to that, but doing the AI for that was actually quite complicated and actually a real weak point in terms of the QA and having to go back and forth on this beetle is just not going back into the position it should when so we tried to really reduce the behaviors.
It's funny, most bugs coming from the bugs, right?
Exactly.
I love it. There's a beauty to it.
It was true. It was true.
So look, there's something we're now, what are we, how long since you've launched, Greg? Has it been a year? What's time these days?
Not quite, no. We launched September 23rd. So it's been what,
so look,
8 months?
it's 8-9 months. Look, it's been out there now for a bit, right? The game really, as we've spoken about today, it's really purposeful in its intent, and it's really, some could say, defiant of, the norms of the industry or the medium as we see it today in regards to open world games and stuff. The absence of hard fail states, the absence of combat, all of this sort of stuff. The really fiercely meditative qualities that the game has. What coming out the other end, and I want to hear from you as well, Martin, on the other side of this too, answering this question. But for you and Daniel, Greg, standing 9 months on the other side of launch, what is it that you're most, you've been through award season, you've seen the sales, you've got the fans that no doubt have sent you emails or whatever it is, you've showed it around the world. What is it that, you're most proud of, or what do you feel Sable has done?
God, it's so hard to say. I can't help but feel I still think we're kind of processing parts of it, but I think we're really proud of. I think we're really proud of how, as a creative work, it's very much what we set out to achieve, and you're right, and it's kind of a response to a lot of what, particularly when we started development, what was going on in open world games at the time. I think we're really proud of how that came out, and we do get really. Some of the messages we get about people who were not in a good frame of mind before playing it, and then they felt like it felt like a kind of a meditative kind of experience for
catharsis
them. Really.
Of sorts.
And I think that's been really cool to read actually, and not something I particularly think we set out to or expected to achieve. And I think it's cool that what we did with the world was so. I think it would have been very easy to make a game that didn't have the depth of the world building I think we ended up with personally. And I think it would have been very easy to just lean on the aesthetic aspects of the game and let that carry us, and then just make something that was a lot less ambitious, a lot more polished in some ways, and just a bit neater. And I think I always kind of leant the other way, which was just let's try stuff, and even if it only kind of comes off, it's still like, ambitious, and it will still have something interesting that comes from it. And I think that's where some of those ideas coming through, and the sheer scale of what we did, and like the amount of, I think some people will say, oh yeah, it's empty or whatever. But then I look at it and I'm like, there are so many, there are locations I forget about. Like, I think maybe they're just spread out well, but yeah, like I think I'm really proud of just the sheer scale of it. And the team was a really nice team, a really brilliant team to work with. And I'm really proud and happy to have been able to work with the team that we did.
Yeah, it really is. It really is a marvel in those ways that you've said. It does. And as I said earlier in the podcast, I saw the GIF when it was going off, and I got that game, however many years later. So I agree with you in that sense. And look, one of the things, I don't think we'll have a chance to cover it today, but one of the things that I really did love about the game was that it doesn't purport to be this, Red Dead Redemption, where it's like every single thing is you got to interact with and, try and hijack my carriage like every 5 minutes. I want to have some form of interaction all the time. Like it feels really well balanced and proportioned, the amount of density to the world, whether it be the interactions with NPCs or whether it be the wildlife or whether it be the landmarks or the secrets or whatever it might be. I actually think that was definitely one of my favorite achievements of the game for sure. And it felt nice and sparse enough for me to move through and have those meditative moments without fearing that some bandit was going to come and, hijack my bike. So, Martin, what about you? I mean, it's a big undertaking for you as well, you and Michelle on Sable. Is there been anything particularly moving for yourself now looking back on it? Or, how do you feel as an artist yourself looking back in retrospect at the title?
I think I'm just very proud. I think Sable is a game that I feel a big sense of pride in the sense that I'm very happy with what we achieved, both on the sound and music, but also just how everything came together. I think I just look at that game as something that I'm happy with. Personally, I'm very happy that big games like this and also balancing life and other projects for sound designers can be hard, because we're constantly doing a lot of different projects, because things lock in, and things can be hard. Personally, I'm also very happy that I didn't burn out or something from a project this big, because that's always a risk when you get towards the end and there's a lot of things needing to be done. But I think all in all, I think it's just the game, the process, the team. What kind of remains is, I feel, is reflected in the end game. So when you play the actual game, I feel like it's all there, the things that I'm very happy about. So I feel like I can kind of just point to, if you play the game, you can see the things that I feel are worth talking about the game. Like it's all there. It's something I'm very happy to have been a part of, and I'm very thankful to have been a part of it.
Yeah, it's a great feeling to finish, and it doesn't come often, but like when you finish that project and when you can look back and you can just say, oh, the things I'm proud of are in the game, like exactly. We set out to make the thing and we made the thing. It doesn't feel like we compromised on all these fronts or we fell short in all these different ways. So congratulations, gentlemen, and to the rest of your team. It's super, super exciting, and I thoroughly enjoyed my time with Sable. All right. And you know what? Thanks for joining me here today as well. It was lovely, lovely meeting you both. And I really implore everyone, if you haven't checked out Sable yet and, you've got some spare time, or, things are tense at work, or you just want to try something quite different to the, what you're getting from your open world experiences these days, really give it your time. Try it out. Thank you, folks.
All right. Thanks, Trent.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much.